checkpoint at the edge of the Chernobyl Exclusion Zone groaned open with a metallic screech that echoed through the ghostly silence of the forest. A sign, weathered and rusted, read, "Stop. No unauthorized entry. Radiation hazard." 3 figures stepped across the invisible boundary. Shadows among shadows. Artur led the way, tall and quiet, a former engineer turned stalker. He was meticulous, almost religious in his respect for the zone. Behind him, Dennis followed, skeptical and pragmatic, a man of logic with a dry wit that often masked fear. Bringing up the rear was Vitaly, younger, impulsive, but with a sensitivity to the atmosphere most stalkers lost over time.
"Do you feel that?"
Vitalik muttered, his voice barely above a whisper.
"The air? It always feels like this here."
Artur replied, not turning, but Dennis slowed, scanning the tree line.
No birds, no bugs, not even the wind.
They continued in silence, the radiation detectors clicking rhythmically like a Geiger metronome. As they approached Pripyat, the decaying buildings loomed from the mist like half-submerged tombstones. Pripyat's Ferris wheel stood frozen in time, its cars swaying ever so slightly despite the still air. The men took shelter in an abandoned apartment block for the night. The windows were shattered, walls crumbling, the air thick with mildew and something more elusive. Memories, perhaps. Dennis stared at a children's mural on the wall.
They left everything, like they'd be back in a week.
Artur unrolled a map and pointed to a red circle. "We head here tomorrow. There's a facility under the hospital, Soviet, unmarked on most maps. I heard it was a control center, possibly a lab." Vitalik paled. "They say the zone doesn't like people finding those places." Dennis chuckled dryly.
"The zone? You sound like the old stalkers. Next you'll say, Valery Khodemchuk is watching us."
Vitalik glanced at the window.
"They say he never left, that he's buried in Reactor 4. No body was ever found."
Artur spoke, quiet and firm. "Some believe he's the first phantom, that the zone is him now." They approached the ruins of Pripyat Hospital the next morning, a mist clinging to the broken windows and collapsed roof. Inside, old stretchers lay rusting, radiation-soaked firefighter gear still littered the floor. Their detectors screamed in bursts as they moved deeper, finally stopping at an elevator shaft, sealed with a rusted metal door. "This is it," Artur whispered. They forced it open and descended into the bowels of the hospital, their flashlights cutting tunnels into the darkness. Beneath the building was a sub-basement, concrete corridors, wiring ripped from the walls, strange symbols etched in old Soviet script. Then the voices started, faint whispers, echoes. Dennis froze. "Did you hear that?" Vitalik nodded, eyes wide. Artur moved forward, almost entranced. A corridor led them to a steel door with no handle. Burned into the concrete beside it were the words, "Khodemchuk." The lights flickered, then died. They emerged later that day, shaken. Inside the chamber they'd discovered were rows of decomposed documents, film reels and bones. Human bones, some still wearing lab coats. Dennis rifled through a file labeled Project Seraphim. They were experimenting with radiation-induced psychic phenomena, trying to create soldiers that could interact with spectral matter. Artur was pale.
What if they succeeded?
That night, they camped in a school building. The wind had returned, but it moaned through the halls like something alive. Shadows twisted in corners where there should have been none. Vitalik woke screaming, said he saw Artur standing outside the window, but Artur had been asleep. Then, the next morning, Artur was gone. No sign, no trail, just his Geiger counter still ticking beside his sleeping bag. Dennis and Vitalik searched for hours, days. But the zone had swallowed Artur whole. Their maps were suddenly useless. Paths they'd walked vanished. Buildings shifted. Voices mocked them in the night. On the third day, Vitalik saw a figure near the Ferris wheel, shrouded in mist. He ran to it, calling Artur's name. But it wasn't Artur. It was something else. A silhouette of a man with no face, glowing eyes, a badge that read Khodemchuk. Vitalik dropped to his knees. The figure raised its hand, and the entire city seemed to groan. They took refuge in the bunker again, the only place that seemed stable. Dennis reviewed more documents. Khodemchuk, Subject 0, Exposure Time Infinite, Project Lead, Colonel Andropov. Results, Spectral Transmigration confirmed, Host consciousness fused with a spatial anomaly, Status IRRETRIEVABLE.
He's not just haunting the zone,
Dennis muttered.
He is the zone.
Vitalik nodded, trembling.
And he's angry. We're the infection now.
Dennis recorded a final message on an old Soviet radio. This is Denis Belov. Zone team, 3 men, 1 missing, Artur. If you find this, do not enter Pripyat. The zone is alive. It is intelligent. It watches. It speaks in the voice of Valery Khodemchuk. He was never buried. He became something else. A guardian, a warden, maybe a god. We trespassed. We were warned. Now, it wants us gone. The radio died. Vitalik stood at the doorway.
We need to leave, if we still can.
But Dennis stared at the walls, now pulsing faintly with heat, as if the bunker was breathing. Then, a voice, not from the outside, but from within. Artur is part of me now. Dennis turned to Vitalik.
Run.
Only 1 man made it out. Vitalik staggered back to the checkpoint weeks later, eyes hollow, speech fragmented. He repeated the same phrase to the guards before collapsing.
He's still there, Artur, watching, waiting. The zone has him now. The zone is him
now.